So I'll go ahead and just go through some housekeeping. Brilliant. Okay, hello and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Manara. As a Director of Marketing here, I'll be your host today, and my privilege to be your moderator. I'm joined by 4 incredible speakers who will share their unique experiences and insights, but please do note that these are their own experiences and opinions, and they're not here to present their employers. I encourage you all to ask as many questions as you can. The chat is open, and we will also have a Q&A section at the end where we'll be picking questions to answer. So please feel free to comment throughout the webinar. You don't have to wait for the Q&A. I'll go ahead and start the webinar with some introductions. We'll start with Ileana Montag, who's also our CEO and co-founder at Manara.
Hi, everyone. Really pleased to be here, and thank you to all these great speakers for joining us. We're really excited to be running this webinar. I am the co-founder and CEO of Manara. We run the largest community of computer scientists in the Middle East and North Africa with a specific focus on women and on Palestine. The founding story, just briefly, is that I was living in Gaza at some point and ran into tons of women like my co-founder, who is one of the most impressive women I know. And that's when I learned that this region is so rich in not only very well-educated people with a lack of local job opportunities, but particularly women who study technical fields. And we partner with big companies and small companies alike in Europe, primarily for hiring the talent from our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ileana. Manjuri, why don't you go next?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. I'm really pleased. It's kind of been a miniature dream of being somewhere partnered up with Manara, Ileana. Really admire the work that you and your organization do. We need more of such work in the world of women. I'm Manjuri. I am originally from India, born and brought up in New Delhi. Worked in different cities in the country, worked with different organizations like Accenture, was working with Zalando for about 5 years in Berlin before I moved to my current organization in OLX. Have about 20 plus years of experience in the field of human resource management, as well as DEI for the last couple of years. I've lived and worked across India, Sweden, Czech Republic, as well, and call Berlin home for the past 9 years now. In my current role, I take care of all things talent. We've actually combined everything under the talent wing, from acquisition, branding to development, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion for OLX globally. And I love what I do here. That's a bit about me, and yeah, ready to pass on to Franziska maybe.
Thank you so much. Happy to go next. And yeah, also very happy to be here in this round. My name is Franziska Haug, pronouns she, her, hers. And I am in my main job a hiring manager in the technical area. So I hire mainly developers and product owners and designers, UX designers. My career started out in community management / program management, but the topic of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging has been a strong pillar in my career in everything that I did, and has been a strong focal point over the last years. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussions and the topics that we will be looking at today.
Thank you so much, Franziska. And last but definitely not least, Enrique.
Of course. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you, Manara, for having us. I'm Enrique. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a global DEI manager at eBay currently, but I do have a law background. And I come from Brazil. It's been 3.5 years that I've been living here in Berlin. All this time I've been working in the DEI space, and I do hold a master's in human rights and an MBA focused on strategic HR. It's lovely to be here and just be able to discuss a bit more of our work with you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introductions. Looking forward to this webinar. We have some really good, different, diverse backgrounds to give their opinions. So I'll go ahead and start with our first question. How can organizations foster a culture of belonging and inclusivity that goes beyond policies and token representations and truly empowers individuals to thrive, collaborate, and innovate together? I guess I'll pose a question first to Manjuri. Let's hear your views on that.
Thank you for that question. Before I get to the question, Tamanna, I would really love to, and I at the start of the call I said, I'm pronouncing your way the Indian name way, and I really like that. And folks on the call, if you don't know what it means, it actually means an endearing wish, a want or something. So I love that name. I have a very good friend also with the same name. With that, I'd actually want to step back and just mention two figures to talk about before we talk about why and what this means and how do you create that inclusion. Tamanna, to your question, it's interesting when we see it's only 1 in 4 C-suite leaders today is a woman. And when we look at women of color, this reduces further down. Only 1 in 20 is actually a woman of color. Only 15% of engineering jobs are held by women today, making it the STEM field where women are most highly underrepresented. And this is one of the reasons when we start thinking about this whole conversation with our leaders in the organization, it starts from a story, but it also starts from the data. And once you put those numbers in front of your leadership or your management board, the conversation starts becoming a little bit easier and the why becomes clear. What we need to start with, to your question, Tamanna, in organizations beyond policies and procedures, I think the first thing is commitment from the top. If you don't have your CEO and your CEO -1 and even your board committed to the needle movement required on diversity, equity, and inclusion, nothing will happen. From the beginning, you will never have a budget, and everything will be more of a pinkwashing exercise than any real work. So that leadership commitment is needed. Leadership commitment could also be defined as really putting hard goals. So when you talk about the organization priorities with your financial goals, there should be an inclusion goal or belongingness goal, wherever the organization is. It could be on a diversity awareness journey. It could be on an inclusion journey. It could be on a belongingness journey, depending on the maturity. The second one, which is super important, is education and awareness. And last week I was really impressed with this. We had a campaign on disability in our organization for the month of December, and we had invited Claire Harvey, who's one of the Paralympians, and when she was sharing her experience plus different attributes about disability and the different types of disability, neurodiversity, and other aspects as well. It was interesting that the organization actually reacted when they learned so much about certain areas of disability. So education and awareness is important in terms of data, in terms of different forms of diversity, in terms of understanding intersectionality, how this impacts employees, how this impacts employee life cycle as such altogether. The third is driving the accountability. So yes, you have to have goals, but you also have to have measurements. And how do you drive this accountability? This accountability can be driven at 2 levels, from a manager level plus a leader level. And ensuring, as I mentioned, this needs to sit in goals, this needs to sit in manager excellence goals, this needs to sit in KPIs, etc. But it also needs to be enabled with leaders, and that's where your training on inclusive leadership comes in. So this is beyond the policies and procedures as such. And then there's an accountability that comes from the external partners. So whether you work with, there's one which comes from within, which is setting up your business resource groups or employee resource groups. You could call them BRGs, ERGs, they're replaceably used in the organization. I think it's a very good forum because it keeps the organization overall accountable. And it can bring new dialogues, new topics on board, which even the organization may not be ready to discuss, but they have to discuss because of the push from the ERGs. But the ERGs also need budget. So if you put an ERG and an ERG program, it shouldn't be without a budget. Otherwise, again, it's just talk and not walk. And last but not the least, ensuring that we have processes across the employee life cycle, starting from branding, attraction to even offboarding, that really parsed by your inclusive practices on each of the way. And there are a lot of tools that we can use, not going into the details there. So these are my ways of looking at commitment from the top, enabling the leaders and the managers, creating education and awareness, ensuring you have partners with ERGs and BRGs, and even external partners if they're available, for creating that accountability, measure and hold the leadership as well, your managers accountable for this needle movement in the organization. So this would be the shortest suit solution that I can come up with.
Thank you so much. You made some excellent points there. Francesca, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the same. What do you think? Is there anything you can add?
Yeah, you saw me heavily nodding while Manjari was speaking, because these are exactly the points that I would say as well, particularly the commitment one, and particularly the not only sponsorship, but buy-in from leadership levels, and most importantly, from the highest leadership level. If you don't have that buy-in, it's really, really difficult to change an organization for the better. What I would like to add is that a lot of organizations are really unaware that they already have a very good representation among their staff, right? There is a level of hidden diversity, because a lot of the diversity dimensions, by the way, when we talk about diversity dimensions, we talk about various aspects that characterize a person individually or as a marker, as part of a group of, could be an attribute, for example. So for example, if somebody is a woman, or if somebody is disabled, for example. And a lot of these diversity dimensions, they are present in existing staff. And oftentimes when we talk about things like, for example, disability, that's often considered one of the less, let's say, the diversity dimensions that are less in the spotlight. So there is potential to be unearthed even in current status quo in organizations out there, and a lot of opportunity to foster positive growth in that area. What I also feel is important to underline is that not only to enable and unblock leadership management on this, and not only have their buy-in, but really educate them, help them, because the people that inherently determine a company's culture and also a company's direction over time, that is leadership. We often talk about EIGs, and that's great. You should have them, and that can enable grassroots movement. But in German, we say the fish stinks from the head, and that's very true. You need to see Manjari grinning. You need to enable that from the top as well. And what is also important is that when we talk about token diversity, you might have seen these, representations and posts on LinkedIn, where you see a lot of diversity sort of in the lower ranks, and then the upper ranks, you have that typical representation of this one group. So diversity is also something that when an organization is really transforming, you see people of various backgrounds step into leadership. And oftentimes we talk about increasing the percentage in the representation of women and non-binary people, but there are factors where we see even higher differences between different groups. For example, socioeconomic factor is one of those. And those are things that we really often don't measure or look at in terms of numbers, either because we are unaware of it, or we don't really have the means to measure these kind of things. So again, there is this factor of hidden diversity and the potential that can be unearthed, and being aware of that and integrating that into any kind of day of strategy, into any kind of work, I think is crucial and will enable and unblock any organization with this. And of course, a lot of commitment on all levels, all involved parties, right? And then accountability, when we talk about that, how do you measure that? How do you check in after you've implemented measures? Do you see any changes? What kind of changes do you see? And can you really make that palpable? I think that's also crucial. And that's often forgotten in the rush of the moment, right? We kickstart and then, but do we also check in later?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It definitely has to start from the top and get the buy-in from everyone. So I guess my second follow-up question would be, Francesca, how would you approach this with, let's say, a company that lacks diversity in the first place? To put it bluntly, what if you're dealing with a bunch of white middle-aged men? How do you approach that?
I think Manjari said it very well, right? You need to make your case in a way, because oftentimes when you have the majority group, they lack the lived experience, or even in their socialization, they are unaware. I've had so many conversations where I was like, did you see that? Did you perceive that? And there was, for example, a code of conduct violation or something that happened that was not tolerable. And then people are like, no, I didn't really perceive that. Oh, good that you mentioned that, right? So oftentimes it's that initial spark, and that can be done via numbers and really presenting your case, but also a kind of personal connection, right? How do you relate to that personally? And whenever we talk to usually the majority, which oftentimes is white middle-aged men, as we see often represented in leadership, again, we find those hidden diversity dimensions, right? The percentage of people that live with a disability is actually fairly high, depending on how you define that. So there is a way to build a bridge, right? But at the end of the day, as Manjari said, if there's really no commitment, it's really, really difficult to do. And one person alone cannot always shoulder that. So get your allies, look for allies in your environment who can support you with that, right? And the higher up the ally is, the better it is. So form your network and base it on that, and involve leadership. And I think that can create a garden that can thrive.
Mhm.
You,
And I guess
you
that's
invest.
when
Yeah.
data can then really back that. You
Yeah.
know, there's initiatives. I think numbers are great. Ileana.
I know that I'm a panelist, but I actually want to throw a question back at Manjari and Francisca. Have you ever seen a situation where the leadership team actually changes perspective, or where there's no advocates, no champions on the leadership team initially, and you're able to change their perspective? Because in my limited experience, when I meet with Manara hiring partners or talk to Manara alumni, or just in my own lived experience, what I tend to see is they're usually, when it's successful for me, it's been that there's already some champion there. And it doesn't matter what their lived experience or background is necessarily. Sometimes people are very much a believer of the value that having a diverse team brings to the company, or of that just being the right thing to do. So you can't necessarily tell by looking at them, you know, who's going to be the champion and who isn't. But I've only seen success when there's already a champion there at that leadership level. And so I'm curious if you've seen it be successful from the ground up.
Francisca, want to go first?
I can go first, yes. I would say not like a case where there was no champion at all and it changed. I think it is important to have somebody who has a certain touch point with that, or certain awareness. But I have seen situations where people changed a lot and changed their perspective a lot, even in higher leadership. My observations were in a setting where there was a certain level of commitment already there, and then we could build up on top. But in that particular case, I think it also went back to the experiences this person had previously, and then we can build on top of that. So yeah, but if somebody is like really not convinced and there's no champion at all, yeah, it will probably be very hard to even just create that baseline. I'm not sure, Manjari, what your experience are. Maybe they go into a different direction.
Slightly similar. I haven't seen the change of intent, but I've seen a change of behavior. Behavior. I can take an example. We run our very senior executive leaders through a prototyping inclusion training session with an organization based in the US called Firefly. It's a 3-hour session, and it's very heavy. It takes you into yourself, but it also takes you into, real your schooling backgrounds of the times that the real in groups and out groups are formed. Even I didn't know that we actually form in groups and out groups as probably 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds in the kindergarten as well. So that session had such an impact because it takes you through that, and then your current, etc. Couple of the leaders in our organization, and they were exec leaders, so they were hiring for senior leaders as well. After the sessions, I had 2 or 3 of those people, and thankfully in the tech remit, coming back and said that when I'm looking at my next vacancy, I want my recruiter to genuinely look at a 70 to 80% pipeline heavy with women, especially in tech, especially with an area which was BIT, where you have lesser women in the pool, etc. And they were ready to wait, which is usually the challenge, right? So we can source, yes, but they were ready to wait. So I did see that change in behavior in them. On the flip side, Ileana, your question is very good. And we, on our side as DEI champions, sometimes become too excited and push for these as well. I've been burnt, and I can share that experience here. We had one setup, and this was a team which was distributed across India and Berlin. Now, Berlin, of course, because it's just inherent that you end up, because of our talent pool in technology, you end up having a diverse team. Unless you have some language blockage, you will definitely have a very diverse team. We hired a person who identified themselves as who was a transgender as such, and then it was a journey for the mixed team to really come on board. And this individual had a very bad experience. So it was our fault to not really prepare the team and set this person up for those kind of experiences that this person indeed the end had. And she actually left the organization, shared her experience, left the organization. She also shared that the recruiter did her best to share, the fact that use the correct pronouns, refer to the name or the pronouns, etc., with the hiring manager, but culturally it was so different. And it was in the end our own realization that we should have brought the team on the journey first before hiring someone and setting them up for such experiences. So on the flip side, if the leadership is not super excited and are not committing to it, if we push, it can also turn into something different there. So that was, learning from being burnt from an experience.
Brilliant. Did that answer your question, Liliana? Yeah, she's nodding, so that's great. I'd like to now move to ask, Enrique, I'd love to get your sort of take on how can we use data to back some of our initiatives or win our case when we are presenting to, let's say, a very non-diverse leadership team.
Definitely. I would love to speak a bit about it because we are in a data-driven world. Everything that we do needs to be backed by data. So that's a very important topic, very relevant, especially for DEI initiatives, which you usually need to convince the board or your directors that as to why you're doing such. So I would say that the first thing and the first tip that I could get here is that whatever you're creating, already think about how you want to measure the success of those initiatives. If you already know this from the beginning, that's the best way for you to set yourself for success and to be able to understand in the future if you're actually able to measure it. Is it going to the direction that you wanted? Is it something that you need to reiterate in your projects in the future? So by doing this, it's something that you can already really make sure that your projects are set up for success. On a second point, I do know that some people will say, but DEI is very difficult to measure. I don't have the data points. I don't know exactly what I could do with your area because it's very complex for me. But even for the complex things that we do have in terms of behaviors and what exactly you want to see in terms of change to the organization, those things you can also measure. But if you want to talk about numbers, if you want to talk about specific things that you want to measure, also you need to be innovative about it. You don't need to stick to whatever predefined numbers you would like to use. There are other ways for you to also innovate in the way that you're collecting those numbers. For example, you can take a look at Slack. Many companies are using Slack, for example. And if you take a look at these Slack interactions throughout time about DEI projects and the DEI channel or whatever you set up to be the DEI facing, it's something that you can take a look at. The clicks to specific emails that the DEI team is sending out, you can also understand who is taking a look at those emails. So you can also reiterate and understand what exactly you need to do differently so those emails are more opened. Or the clicks to a web page, for example, the DI page and what exactly people are interested in clicking at, those things you can also quantify and you can use. Or the number of people that are enrolled or in whatever coaching or mentoring programs that you are creating. So, there are so many ways for you to track those numbers. You just need to be a bit more creative and don't look exactly only about demographics, for example. So there are ways definitely for you to do it. You just need to be a bit more interested in being innovative about it.
Sounds like we need to have a mixture of sort of data points, but also tell a story. So at what point how do you manage or balance that? What would be your take on that? Like how much data can we talk about before it becomes meaningful?
Interesting. I would say that probably you need both, always need both. There's a lot of power in storytelling. There's a lot of power in people relating to other employees' stories and to understanding how this was done in a way that is going to empower them, it's going to include them. So I guess both are very important. Both are compelling. Both need to be used in all cases, to be sincere.
Yeah, of course. Makes sense. It goes hand in hand almost.
Definitely.
I just want to add to that while both are important, I think with storytelling, we have to be careful to not ask people to share stories who might not want to share them. And that sometimes people are more comfortable sharing stories with people who are not their coworkers than directly with their coworkers. Sometimes it can feel quite unsafe, or it can feel like you're already putting a lot of work into your environment. And I've seen this in particular, for instance, with a lot of our women alumni get placed in environments where they feel quite different from their teams on multiple levels. You know, they're coming sometimes from a country that is almost a war zone or is a war zone, and they're the only woman on their team and maybe the only Muslim on their team. So there's just so many ways in which they might be feeling different. And if they're there trying to prove themselves and they're having to share the story of how difficult it is to do that, then they feel like sometimes that can get in the way of it. But that doesn't mean that they don't want people to hear these kinds of stories. One thing that we offer at Manara, for instance, as a service, is if a company wants these kinds of stories to be told, we'll bring in people from other companies, from our alumni back, or from my co-founder, or even me sharing these stories as an ally and anonymizing them, so that people can still have access to really that understanding, that qualitative lived experience, without always putting it as on your coworker to be the one to have to share that story with you.
Thank you, Liana. That's definitely a very useful point. I find it in a lot of companies where I've only been the only Muslim, and I've just been expected to be the only Muslim to write blogs and explain everything. And sometimes you feel the pressure of, actually, I don't know everything. Should I be the right person? So that is an excellent example of that. I guess speaking about all these different, convincing leadership and people at the top and people here and there, how do we go about influencing different persona types and managing a variety of stakeholders when running DEI initiatives? Is there a difference? Do we hone in on a different point or a different data point more than the other? Like how would that differ? And I guess, Ileana, why don't you shed some light on this question?
I can start, but I think the one that I have the most experience with is software engineers, because of the work that Manara does, which is mostly working with software engineers. And I think what's interesting about this persona specifically is that very frequently software engineers are very pragmatic and data driven. And even though, like any other human being, stories, I think, can have an impact and do have an impact, sometimes I can see people really, really wanting to stay very focused on data, or even almost to the point of being contrarian. Like, you can't convince me. I don't want to be convinced, right? I don't see this as often coming from leaders. I think if leaders are engaging with me, then inherently they tend to be interested. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in a relationship and speaking multiple times together. So I think at the leadership level, engineering leaders who I speak with at least tend to be already really quite interested in building diverse teams. They've seen the value. Often they'll point to some specific experience that has changed their perspective. Like, they worked with a team from Algeria and they were just really impressed with the quality of the team, and it's made them more curious about a part of the world that they weren't curious about, and they see the value that that brought. But But I think the point that we already made on the panel about bringing the team along and making sure that the team is ready is super important with the software engineering persona in particular, because it can be very common experience that the team is not ready or interested, or just that the way that software engineers express themselves is very to the point, direct, very focused on just getting that work done. And it can make a person who's just joined and still going through onboarding and trying to figure out the tech stack really uncomfortable when they're spoken to in a way that just makes them feel like they're behind or they're not contributing enough, when in fact it's actually a very normal experience for a new person to have joined. So I think when speaking to that persona, first of all, just for instance, offering training sessions that are open to all the software engineers at the company to join, so that they at least have the option of learning more about what it's like and what role they can play in making somebody feel more comfortable, because I think often it's just a lack of awareness. And I do think you still need to share stories. I think people will be like, talk to me with data, but they're human like everybody else, and somewhere those stories will stick. And I think preparing the people who are joining the teams as well for what it's like to be on a team with that persona. That don't take it personally if somebody's very direct and very focused on just getting the work done in the sprint. Be ready to speak in the language that that team is speaking in. So for instance, instead of saying like, no, I'm not ready to take that task on, instead say something like, how about in this sprint, I pull in a task where I'm going to learn that technology. And then in the next sprint, I actually give an estimate for how long this thing will take me to build. And then the next one, I'll build it. And then you're kind of meeting your persona where they're at.
Thank you. It's a very interesting point of view. Henrique, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because given your background and experience, how did you find yourself with these kind of situations?
Definitely. So first of all, I need to say that being a Latino in Germany, that's difficult. It's something that really makes you need to flex so everybody can really communicate with each other, we can understand each other, and we can put our points across. So in a very multicultural world as ours, I guess that's something that everybody needs to remember. And there's some work around understanding those different backgrounds, communication styles, and working styles that all of us need to work a bit about. So for me, for example, just so everybody knows what I'm talking about, I'm talking about a Latino being more indirect in my discourse. And here, for example, in Germany, I try to be more direct and be more brief on my explanations. So another thing that I think is very important for everyone, and it's something that really helped me throughout my career, is to communicate exactly what you need and what you expect out of the other person. So tell them exactly what you need and how you can be successful to the things that you need from them, what you expect them to do for you. So that really helps because we are all trying to probably accomplish the same objectives. And when the person knows exactly what you need or what you need from them, that becomes easier. And then you can actually troubleshoot on how and why you need those things. So what I would say is definitely build your relationships, create the relationships that you need at the workplace, be close to your stakeholders, and then you can try to understand what are the ways that you two can collaborate and how can you convince that person. And then it ties back to what Ileana was saying that I totally agree. If it's data, if it's a story, what are the ways for you to convince that person that you already have a relationship with? So those would be my 2 cents on this one.
Thank you. I guess for me, I've been in companies where I felt like that we could have done more, but I was not in I wasn't in a leadership role at the time, or I just didn't think it was my place to speak. So what if you're just an employee or just a HR employee where you don't have that kind of level of I guess it's not in your remit, as they would say. How would you go? Does that matter? Have you, in your experience, does it matter? Do you have to be in a leadership role? Can you just present something, make a case, and can that be taken seriously?
So for me, what I would say is you're never a mere HR employee. HR is a central function. It's crucial to the business, so you're never a mere employee. That's the first thing. So you can always drive change. You can always, make things happen at the workplace. That's at least my perspective, and for the companies that I have been working for, I see this happening, currently. So that's good. What I would say is discover exactly what are the values, what are the objectives that the company is trying to accomplish, what are the types of culture that the company is trying to create and modulate. Those things will probably help you to understand how can you then or those things can back you up in the projects and things that you are seeing around that you would like to make a change at. So this is a very simple way for you to start engaging on those things. And trust me, on the DI space, you can bet you are always welcome. There's always more work. There's always more things that we need help with. So you'll probably find a lot of opportunity there for you to collaborate with. And the way for you to do it, in my opinion, is like this. It's just understanding where the company is coming from, what are the goals, and how can you tie that back to the objectives and things that you would like to do yourself with your team and collaborate.
I love that, linking it back to their own values and goals, really reminding them. That's it's a really good one. Manjari or Francesca, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think we, with all the wonderful points that Enrique shared there, I actually went back in time and I remember the power of every and each and every employee. And I can relate to my time in Zalando because we were, at that time I was heading Tech TA, and we had done a fabulous job with hyper growth and hiring a lot of engineers. But we did the probably the disadvantage was that we did end up hiring a lot more men than women, because of course when you go with the speed, you do compromise on this bit. And at that time we were chasing numbers and all right, so you reach a stage. By that time I remember that we had, by employee initiative, there were employee resource groups that had formed in. So there was a women in tech group, there was I think there was a LGBTQ group and a black in tech group that had started within the organization. And this was all bottom up at that point of time. And they were carving out budgets from different areas, like, marketing some, branding some, this and that, and working on small initiatives. This whole topic actually drove up a lot of positive pressure on the management, on the leadership of the organization. And in different all hands, we used to have these get together Fridays at that point of time. They started questioning our founders topics on, hey, let's look at the representation. How many women are there in tech? How many women are there in management and leadership, etc.? And that bottom-up pressure actually ensured that I think in end of 2017, 2018, that's when the company really started looking at DEI. And now we know Zalando is one of the best examples now in Germany as well, for initiatives. Even on the consumer side, it's one of the apps that are super inclusive when you look at the products there. And this was very much driven from an employee. So this probably doesn't have any flamboyant title or something. So whoever started this, nobody should think that they're anything small in the whole scheme of things. So of course, the power of getting together is big, definitely.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Actually, now that you were saying, I do recall when you have a group of people asking for the same thing, it's definitely more manageable and achievable. Brilliant. Francesca, do you have anything to add from your experience?
And as Enrique, you said, you're not a mere employee, right? You have power with everything that you do, with your behavior. This is how you impact positively upon others. So that's one thing with, for example, sharing your pronouns, right? And making sure that people are aware of the pronouns that are your pronouns. It seems to be a simple act, but it also showcases to others, hey, that's something that I could explore. And particularly if you do it very naturally, right? And you just integrate it in your behavior, there is a lot of power that you have. But I have actually 2 anecdotes from my own experience that underline this. At one point, I had a team of 6 engineers and a product owner. 6 engineers were male, product owner was female. And actually, the male engineers on the team came up to me and said, Franziska, we don't have enough women, right? We need more women, and please hire more women. So what they did essentially was come to me. And by the way, I loved that. I loved that, absolutely. They came to me and they said, look, you're the manager. You have the hiring power, right? You have the budget. So make sure that this changes here. And if you need anything, Franziska will support you on that. And I ended up writing about this, by the way. So there's a published article about this story. And also, I had another situation where one of my staff members was feeling that their identity was not sufficiently represented in the initiatives, and making sure to truly listen to them and to understand, hey, what is it that you need? And then enabling them on that to truly feel that they can be genuinely themselves at work and also bring in their identity and thus enrich all of the initiatives. So there is a lot of power in sometimes even just mentioning that, bringing that up, right? It's a very first small step, but it can have a lot of great impact later on. So you have a voice. Every one of you has a voice, and you can use it and continuously learn and unlearn, as we all do.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That was brilliantly said. I guess one question from me is, it sounds to me that I guess a question and brainstorm ideas for initiatives like DEI to really kick off the ground. Sounds like the lead has to be both from the bottom and the top, or your buy-ins. And should this be something, an agenda for a CEO rather than the human resources department? Should this be something you'd be directly dealing with your CEO? Because it has to come from the top. And if your CEO buys in, then, everybody else will, even if they don't want to, they'll have to. So it's a kind of, does that happen currently in companies? Or do you think, it should stay with HR and it should be taken seriously by the company? Yeah, I guess Manjuri, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, no, I tend to talk a lot. So sometimes I let other people talk as well. So, no, all right. So I think the CEO buy-in matters a lot. And I've seen the difference as well. When you have the agenda sitting with the CEO, then it inherently sits with every leader in the organization. It is not another agenda or another initiative only by HR. DEI actually should not sit with HR. It should not end up in HR. It should actually be with the CEO, even if you have, and this is a good practice that I've seen in a lot of organizations, that you have your chief diversity officer directly reporting to the CEO and not into HR. For reasons of the fact that you're driving a lot of initiatives via the employee life cycle, it comes into the HR world. Ideally, it should sit there. DEI is much more than just employees. I was just talking about my previous employer's example. When you are taking your product decisions, when you're taking your marketing decisions, when you're taking your consumer decisions and end customer decisions, even they should be inclusive. So it definitely goes beyond just employees there. When you talk about the leadership commitment from top, even simple things of hiring commitments on these pipeline percentages, when you're talking about sourcing commitments, etc. How does your team work? It's also about the promotion gap, the pay gaps, etc. Everything. If you keep it on the table of the CEO, all these actually become regular. For example, we were talking about the accountability. When we look at data, if you're looking at data which maps starting from your branding, is your branding material inclusive? And this is where the world of AI today can definitely help us. There's a lot of tools like Text.io, like Data People, etc., that can start helping us and bring this data together. You have the DEI dashboard, which should be a part of your monthly review with your CEO and your management board. Starting with the representation numbers, which, okay, unfortunately today you can only look at men and women for different reasons unless you do a self-ID campaign. You look at those numbers, then you look at the different data points through the employee life cycle. You look at what comes in through your candidate experience. You can put in questions there, even asking your candidates, did you actually see a diverse panel or did you just meet all white men through the process, right? So you can have those questions. The next question could be on your onboarding. The next question could be looking at, and even audits, right? So looking at your promotion percentages. Are there, how many women got through, how many men got through? Looking at the pay gap. Is there a huge pay gap between women and men beyond the, say, director level or something like that, looking at your exit interviews, looking at your new hire attrition, all these major data points should actually be on that dashboard monthly, where your CEO is discussing this with the management team. Unless he or she does that, the focus of this management team will not be there. And then this is the team that drives it further down as well. So unless you get that commitment, you will never get because this is where you get the commitment for financial results. This is where you discuss your financial results, right? Today, all organizations are chasing profitability. So with profitability, you should have these results also on the same table to have the same.
Yeah, I was just thinking that when you were talking about CEOs buy-ins, we have a few minutes left, but I just wanted to quickly ask you, so how do you know if somebody like me joins a company, like if I was in charge of the budget, let's say for DEI, how would I know this company is doing their part? Obviously, it depends on how big the company is and what their, budgets are, but is there a percentage benchmark that should be allocated to DEI initiatives? For example, at Manara, we see a lot of the companies we work with, they have very tiny budgets, like around 150K for the whole year for any kind of program, DEI initiatives. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. What is there a benchmark for it, or is it very much still up in the air?
That's an interesting question. I haven't seen a benchmark as such, but unfortunately, what I've heard is in the last 1 year, with all the cost cutting, companies have actually reduced their DI budget. Plus, we've seen a major reduction in the headcount cuts for even chief diversity officer roles. There's so much so this is being called as the anti-woke movement. And I think it started from the US on the cuts on the top level of, first of all, taking away the chief diversity officer role itself. So I can really imagine that the budgets have been slashed on that. Unfortunately, I don't have a benchmark. Maybe Franziska and Henrique have some other thoughts around it if they know.
I wouldn't actually say, Henrique, do you want to go first?
Go for it.
Yeah. Budgets, I think that depends a little bit on the context, but what I would always recommend applicants to do whenever they are in a process with a company is to really ask these, let's put it that way, hard questions, right? In terms of what is your concrete commitment? Do you have a budget commitment towards DEI? What are the concrete initiatives? There are a lot of companies that boast about, we have, employee resource group A, B, C, and D, and that's perfectly fine. What you would also want to see is, again, that representation in the interview process. We do sometimes see that companies channel then all of certain people into the interview rounds. We have that as well. But yeah, you can ask that, and you can always, communicate about these kind of things, and thus also set a standard as an applicant, and ultimately over time, if this becomes more the norm, then also companies realize that this is something that applicants deeply care about. For example, like Great Green Topics as well, how green, how sustainable is a company. Yeah, just wanted to add that because, again, there's a lot of power in the individual's behavior and how that over time accumulates.
No, absolutely. Enrique, did you want to add something?
Adding a little bit to what Franziska was saying, something that I see companies today doing, at least 5 of the big companies that I have been hearing about, they've been doing it already, is just during the interviewing process to have a moment that is not part of your interview, you're not being evaluated, but you can talk to a person that it's either from an ERG, an affinity group, or it's from a specific committee that is for DEI. So you can have any type of conversation, open conversation about what is the company doing for it. I guess that's a very interesting initiative that probably already sends a sign, because if the company is willing to put that person to talk to you, it's probably because you will see there are some initiatives being developed. And it's something that other companies in any level, any type of number of employees, they can start doing. Just understanding what exactly we are doing and, communicating this out to the candidates can be something that will really bring the right, attract the right candidates to your company.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We have just under 5 minutes to go. I'd love for each panelist to give me one key takeaway. If there's one thing the audience can take away today, what would that be? Let's start with Ileana.
Sure. I mean, I think the example that Manjuri shared around how it can start bottoms up and it can ultimately have influence is the thing that I would want everybody to remember, or Enrique, the way you put it is there is no such thing as a mere HR employee. One of the best examples that I've seen of this is with our partnership at Manara with Google, where the person who spearheaded all of that literally put on one of the most robust DEI recruiting efforts that I've ever seen, with 60 different partners around the globe, all as a passion project on the side before ever getting it officialized or getting any budget behind it. And it was the traction that was created by that and the actual results that then convinced the company to invest in it. So just know that whatever level of the organization you're at, you can absolutely make a difference. And just adding to that, something we haven't said yet is it's a long road sometimes. It can get really lonely. So find community, find people who keep you encouraged, because ultimately you're not only helping your company reach its goals better, which is obviously the core reason that companies invest in this, but you're also making a difference in people's lives and in creating a more equal playing field in the whole world.
Thank you, Liana. Manjuri, what's your key takeaway?
Yeah, +1 to all what Ileana just said. I think my message would be to DEI champions and leaders, or even HR talent leaders in the organization, whoever's championing it. Focus on what you want to deal with. Don't pick up all the battles all together. Focus and it could be awareness, it could be more inclusion, it could be inculcating belongingness, but focus your efforts. Number one. And number two, pick up one metric that you can measure and prove your point on that metric as well, and keep people accountable. So this would be my one message.
Love it. I love that metric thing. Enrique.
Sure. I would say that it will be very important for especially our HR colleagues here in the call, to focus on the data, on storytelling, on behavior change and modeling, communicate exactly what you need, and try to be part of the change that you want to see at the company, either talking to your HR representatives or to the CEO themselves, but be part of the change that you want to do.
Love that. Yeah. And then lastly, Francesca.
Yeah, I would like to continue on what Ileana started with, the whole thought of community, but from a different angle. Looking at our round, you have 4 people, and Tamana, including you, 5, that are talking about day up topics from an expert angle, who have lived experiences. We've, went through the rough seas on our journeys as well. So there is wisdom in community. Seek out that wisdom. You're not alone in what you do. And even if it's just that first step of, and I'm shamelessly saying it, following us on LinkedIn, because we are, I think, all on LinkedIn, that can be a first step, or connecting in the company with people that are passionate about that. And that will give you so much back, because you're one part of many people.
That is such a small step, but it can make such a huge difference. Thank you. We definitely share a lot on our socials, and that's how we, a lot of the times get connected. And I think I met most of you through that. So yeah, that it's very underrated, but it makes a huge impact. Thank you so much. We're just exactly on time with 1 minute to go. So this webinar will be shared with all the attendees, even the ones that weren't able to make it today, probably in a couple of days. And thank you for your time today. Hopefully see you at the next one.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us and having us here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.